In today's world, cybersecurity isn't just an IT issue, it's a business risk, a leadership responsibility, and a strategic imperative. On this podcast, we cut through the noise to discuss real threats, real incidents, and real solutions with the leaders shaping cybersecurity, data privacy, and digital resilience. If you're responsible for protecting systems, managing risk, or guiding your organization through digital transformation, this show is for you because cybersecurity isn't optional, it's foundational. Welcome to Secure IT, the podcast where we explore how technology, policy, and leadership intersect to shape modern cybersecurity. I am Philip de Souza, and today's episode focuses on AI, not as a shiny new tool, but as a force that is rapidly changing attack surfaces, data governance, and trust inside organizations. My guest today is Craig Nelson, a longtime technology leader, founder of GrowthIQ.ai. It doesn't get any more AI than that. Craig has spent decades helping companies operationalize AI to drive real business outcomes. Craig and I are working on a couple of projects together with a few others like-minded executives. And what I find particularly interesting is that his work sits right at the crossroads of innovation and risk. And as we were talking about in the pre-show, what I'm going to get out of this today is risk mitigation while Craig focuses on AI. And that's what makes this conversation especially relevant for CISOs, security leaders, and boards. Craig Nelson, welcome to Secure IT. AI in one word, opportunity or threat?
Since in this case here, you gave me the opportunity to talk about my past a little bit by saying I've been doing this for decades. Huge opportunity.
Terrific. I asked for one word and that's what I've got. Thank you. So you watched AI evolve from something experimental into something that's now embedded in daily business workflows. From your perspective, what's fundamentally changed? Why is AI adoption accelerating now?
Yeah. When you look at, companies like OpenAI and the other, ones that most people know as brand names, they've been around for a decade. We've been building software for a couple of decades, and machine learning isn't something new to us either. But to me, to be honest, it's like a garage band. It's been building for a decade, then all of a sudden there was a hit. And to me, the hit from the people I talk to day to day is ChatGPT and Grok and others like it, where all of a sudden they could use it in their personal day-to-day world. They started to apply it to their business world, but it's one of those hits that has to happen that makes it dead simple, which they did. I think that's why suddenly it's been popularized, but it's not new.
Oh, I couldn't concur more. And at some point, you launch GrowthIQ.ai. AI stops being optional and starts becoming unavoidable for organizations. So when exactly did that happen?
So we've been GrowthIQ growing the company for the last 2 years. And in AI years, in terms of it being popular, that's actually a long time, believe it or not. And so, my background is in systems management, security, you name it. But over the last decade, a lot of it has been with growing companies' revenue. So I immediately saw this as an opportunity to grow revenue in an intelligent way. Hence the GrowthIQ, growth intelligence. So what we've been doing for the last couple of years is spending time with any vertical that would speak to me, first of all, and talk about where they were at with AI and where they're going. But then I pivoted, and this is some of the work you and I have been doing together. I started to interact by way of the global AI community with literally hundreds of people. We would schedule these events. They did the first one at a brew pub, 40 people showed up. Did the second one at a larger convention center, 160 people showed up. A lot of people, right, that wanted to talk about.
Absolutely. If just for you, putting it out there, right? Putting the word out there.
It was just basically LinkedIn,
Yeah.
not even promoting it. So there was a general excitement interest, and then when we got there, fear. So I'm glad we're talking about security because fear's in almost every conversation I have about this topic. But for us, the first year, we're talking about 2 years ago, it was just learning, hearing why do they fear AI? And as you can imagine, it's all over the spectrum, everything from fear of job to, who moved my cheese kind of discussions around, all right, things are going to be different.
Amazing. 160 people, that's a lot of pizza, mixed with fear. I think there's a tagline in there somewhere, Craig. So, there's no doubt, right? Things are moving very fast, and then speed is great. Speed without guardrails obviously can be dangerous. And that's where security starts to enter the conversation. Here on Secure IT, we often talk about how attackers adapt faster than defenders. From what you're seeing, how is AI changing the threat landscape? Not just for security teams,
Yeah.
but for business teams, deploying AI tools without realizing the risk.
Well, I think, one of the things that was said at our last community event was Copilot is not autopilot. These technologies don't just, in a sense, deploy themselves, no matter how smart you have IQ on there. But know that I would say over the last few years, I'm unlearning a lot. In fact, I probably have unlearned more, Philip, than I've learned. And so, I was part of the early SaaS craze. We're talking a long time ago where we thought, going over the internet was going to be a big deal because of the social part of hacking was going to go away. We were going to have it in a separate data set. We thought that was a big deal. Clients didn't. So we had to educate them. Today, we also have to educate them. But one of the things that we do now with our platform is every client have a separate tenant. So for us, do we, think that the multi-tenant approach is smart? From a cost standpoint, yes. From a security standpoint, no. So every one of our clients has a private tenant. And the reason why we had to unlearn was that was not, right, our past couple of companies in the SaaS environment. They were always multi-tenant. So that was, square one was that. Then square two was controlling the content as it was being ingested into AI. Vector databases are a different animal. And by the way, relational to vector doesn't matter. You have to know the source of the data. This is well before the injection that could possibly occur during a prompt. We're talking about scanning legacy data, bringing it into a central vector database in a really smart manner, one in which doesn't corrupt that central vector database. And I'll stop there on the technology front. I don't build the solution, but I do speak to it. But know that was square one. If you can do foundational AI in a smart way by ingesting content that doesn't expose you, that's square one. Square two is going to be, you got to be thinking about role-based from the beginning. If you want the organization to use it, in other words, are you going to put sales and customer facing data in it? Sure, no worries. But the minute you then pivot to the vision stuff, the roadmap of the product of the company, the accounting stuff, your financials, that's where the role-based also, plays a role. So know that, that way into the AI database does need to be governed.
And as with any organization, whether it's the sales function or finance or marketing or any one of those, uh, I like the fact that you've got a platform with guardrails in organizations, as you find, and I do know this from our offline conversations, that you're primarily focused on small business. And I want to stay on my security conversation just for a bit. So in organizations, there'll be key influencers who are driving AI within their organizations. While we're still on the security conversation, any AI use cases where users have unintentionally expanded the attack surface?
Well, couple points here, and let me ground this by conversation with clients, and one particular one, wealth management. So when you think about wealth management, all the customer facing stuff, not really an issue when it comes to security, but the customer data and the compliance around the way they treat the customers, the compliance rules around how they record or can't record calls. There's a whole raft of things. And so the first conversation was with an executive. The second conversation was with the chief compliance officer, just to understand where the guardrails had to be. My first point was all this content coming in. So you had to define, the guardrails coming in. Then once they got there, right? Can everybody on the platform see the knowledge base, adjust the knowledge base? The answer is no, of course not. But when it comes down to security, everything from encrypting the transmissions to data at rest, I should say, all of that needs to be governed. We do it by client, right? By tenant. So that's the way we're doing it at the moment. But that was a wealth management company. We also did business recently with a company that builds very large real estate, basically apartments. And, they decided to check in their accounting data. And at the same time, they wanted to check in all of their property management data. So you can imagine, the enormous amount of risk if any of that gets out, because it's everything from the business of their accounting to the business of the people that are staying in these properties. So there's quite a bit there. We're not, as far as maybe health data, but it's close, because in that's going to be, the people and their wage and a whole number of things that you're going to need to secure. So I'll go back to what I said earlier. You have to have an administrator on the platform, a content manager of the platform, well before you get into the end users being on it.
Correct. So we've talked about, multiple verticals. You talked about real estate, you talked about finance. You alluded to health care, and I'm presuming you've got a vast section of clients in these different industries. What do organizations underestimate in terms of risk?
Well, I think what they underestimate, and let's take a step back, right? Almost every conversation that I have with a client today starts off with privacy. They want to protect, because the minute we talk about AI, what we're talking about here is building a knowledge base, which is their company's DNA. So let's think about that for a minute. If it's your DNA and you've been in business for 20 years, another vertical we're working with, a mortgage company, they've been in business for 27 years. So when we talked about capturing their DNA, they said, great news, because then we could use this as a way of basically having a digital assistant for their best people. In other words, it's learned about 27 years worth. So it's got a lot to go on. So that's a lot of information. They say bad news is, now let me get this straight. Are we going to be able to, some way, somehow, someone can hack into this? Somebody could download it. I mean, all these various basic questions you have, they really want to know where this DNA of their company is going to be. So the value proposition is clear. This is a digital assistant that learns your business. Then it optimizes over the months, quarters, as it's learning more and more. That's all positive. But the negative is, what happens if somebody leaves and some way, somehow finds a way of extracting that DNA? So I think that's always going to be a concern. I don't know if this is answering your question, but I wanted to bring that up because that's the big deal. Once you position AI as something that's going to learn your business right now, today, then it's going to optimize it over time. They see it as strategic. And when I see it as strategic, I'll use an example of a client. When we started talking about the idea of a data lake. So what's a data lake? A data lake is basically your legacy systems as they've been for maybe a decade or two. We want to bring that in, but we don't want to bring in everything, right? We had one client, 510,000 files on SharePoint. Of course, we didn't bring in everything, but we brought in a good amount. Then we extended, right, the knowledge base to include their CRM. So we do an extraction from the CRM dynamically. So think about security concerns around that, right? As we're doing that. Then they pivoted and said, well, we also want to go against this other system over here. Can we do a CSV extract? So now I'm getting into the details, but what I'm saying is all of that legacy information, all of the current information, it comes into this central database. And this is not the relational database of old, is it? This is something completely different. There is no taxonomy. It learns that on the way in, which is fascinating to me, because these relational databases we built in the past, they were all but unmanageable. Well, now you can actually, within about a week, so we call it the 21-day challenge, right? Ingest as much as you can about your DNA. And in a week, start analyzing it. In another week, let's get in front of your management team and talk about use cases. Well, in 2 weeks, they're suddenly seeing us correlate data in this data lake. We're going across their CRM and we're asking questions like, what is the health of my current client base? Then they pivot and they say, what's the health of my new deals? I said, how'd you do that? Well, I think in the end, what AI is proving out is that this makes For SMBs, you mentioned that's who we target. They don't have a data scientist in the room. They've never heard the term vector database, nor have they heard what a token is. Do they need to learn either one of those? No. But what they do know is the health of their business. So back to my central point, once you have this data lake ingested into this centralized, right, KB, let's call it, at that point, that is a risk. And one company said, could we put that in our bunker? And I said, what do you mean by bunker? They actually have a bunker somewhere where they have their computing stuff, right? I don't even know where it is. But the main point was that they said, but this is strategic. And I want to come back to that. So you have to put controls. One of the questions you had is a cross-functional group. You need to have a cross-functional group involved. And then it's been pretty rare. We've got 6 pilots going on right now, the 21-day challenge. 6 pilots. They're all different verticals, Phil. I'm learning about each one of these verticals and their respective business through their data. So again, this is all scary stuff when you think about it, because if you correlate all that and then make judgments on it, what if that gets out? I'll stop there.
Oh, no, thank you. I mean, this is a fire hose to digest. And if there's one thing I give you, it's consistency, because let's start with the understatement of the year. This is not your grandma's or sort of relational database, right?
No.
This is 3D or 4D chess on steroids.
Yeah.
If we attempt an analogy. And in the past, you've talked about avoiding random acts of AI.
Yeah.
And from a security standpoint, unfocused AI experimentation creates exposure, IP risk, compliance issues. And so in a lot of ways, and we've used all the buzzwords here in terms of, hey, get a framework, talk about strategy. And so security is strongly embedded in here as part of the outcome. We also talked about privacy. We talked about frameworks. The administration in the past has talked about AI risk mitigation frameworks. And as I gently now transition from security to governance, data, trust, let's talk governance, right? When AI systems are pulling data, in your case, your 21-day test, pulling data from CRMs, from customer platforms, internal knowledge bases, what are the most important guardrails either your business owners or leaders should put in place before scaling?
I think the most important part is that we call it the foundational AI part. So we do that in 21 days. And within that time frame, we look at ultimately what's the audience for this in your company. And maybe it's a division, you do everybody in that division. Maybe it's a small company, you do everybody in that small company. So that's the first thing. You have to know your audience. Then you take a look at your content. And we do some data structure work where we identify what content's going to go where. Keeping in mind that when companies say who owns the data that we're pulling is live. In other words, if you've got data in Google, if you've got data in SharePoint, we pull it live. If you have it in your CRM, again, with an API, we pull it live. These terms we just used, they don't know any of these terms, and do I want them to know what an API is? No, but what I do want them to know is that data is theirs. It sits in the same environment that it does today. Look at your AI or vector database as this thing that's over here, secured in your private tenant. But that content, if you walk away from us tomorrow, still yours, always was yours. And that's going to be something that if somebody else in your organization has access to that SharePoint drive, guess what? We can't govern that. So what we do is we pull into this AI vector database things dynamically during the course of the day. Or if, let's say, they change the content, we will pull in net new, we'll pull in changed, we'll update removal. So during the course of the day, you're operating just as you are today. We're just bringing it in to execute once it's in the knowledge base. So I've talked about the way into the knowledge base. Just as important is the way out of the knowledge base. So when we first started digging into these models, it's amazing what you can tune. Right? For developers that jump into the SDK, this is not me. I'm going to say that right up front, not me. But somebody else that gets into that level is they will use the SDK from OpenAI to do the validation of content on the way out. But before they do that, each individual who asks the question, they can actually turn on and off whether or not they want to go to the internet. And what does that mean? If your knowledge base is clean, right? It's got your business, it's data that you verified. That means you're working on verified data. It's only when, and I would say it's the minority of the queries now, that the chats against the AI are actually external. They're mostly internal, which is fascinating to me. They so quickly built up their knowledge base, and that's what their people rely on, that they're dealing with the approved style guide, right? The approved product capability, the approved customer sat database. So they're dealing with that internal. You can also turn up and turn off, in this case, you have the verbosity on the way out, but just know that whatever is published back out to the user, we know what they've asked. We know what is published. It's got a date and timestamp. So in a sense, over time, you have the conversations all being captured. So compare that to where companies are today, right? Keeping in mind that many people in the field are using their tool of choice, right? Their bring your own tool of choice. That's a concern with these companies, right? They're rolling their own technology, and that's a problem because the knowledge that they're using to make decisions off of may or may not be company knowledge. And even worse, it could be off the internet. So we're finding that on the internet, 40% of this might be flawed data. So we do have to, on the way back out, when we're doing a response, we do review it against the knowledge base. The knowledge base internal always beats the external query to the internet. Always. And then we're also toying with now this idea of a memory table. And the memory table, look at that as caching, right? The most important stuff about your company. So what if we went to that first, then it went to your knowledge base? What that means is that you're more effectively using your tokens, you're more effectively giving answers back. But when you do this process that I'm talking about, it's not immediate. For that instant gratification you get when you're using, pick one, Grok or ChatGPT, just know that they're not doing this part, right? They're not grounding at your company, nor are they looking at it on the way back. Are they looking at the validity of the content that it's publishing to that individual user, or is it tracking it? So to me, it's how can you get them from where they're at today, spending $20 a month, to using the corporate platform, which is grounded in their data. But I think most important, you're tracking, and it's really a help me help you. We want to know what they're asking and what's not coming back. We've turned the inference engine off in some cases. So, I think most people know LLMs are basically trained to hallucinate in a way, right? If it doesn't have the answer, it'll make it up. You can turn that off.
Yep.
Well, I didn't know that 2 years ago, but I know it now. And then the question is, well, then what does that mean? We call it human in the loop. If you can interact with users as they're using AI, you can basically, like a decision tree, ask them further questions. But if it doesn't know the answer, it doesn't just do a couple of turns and make it up. It's got to interact with the human. The more the human is part of this dialogue, the more we can dial in what it is they're after. And if at the end of that decision tree, it says, I don't know, what we're finding with our clients, that's not a bad answer versus the, hallucination problem.
True. I think in the last 5 minutes, you've given every small business owner who chooses to listen to this podcast a practical guide to AI adoption. You talked about ownership, you talked about AI modeling, and the whole, cross-functional collaboration, which I'll dig into a little more. But, give me 30 seconds on, you opened this last conversation with ownership, right? Who owns the data? But I want to take this up one level to AI governance. So who owns the AI governance in an organization? Is it the security team? Is it IT? Is it legal? Is it the business? And the reason I'm asking this, it's cloaked in, whoever, if it breaks, it's, to the responsibility of the guy that owns it. So the question is, who should own AI governance?
Yeah, so this was a huge topic in our various global AI community sessions last year. And that is, who is at fault if AI goes wrong? First thing you have to do is build into your platform the ability to say, this answer is a bad answer. So we did that, right? Or this answer is a great answer and you can share it with your peer group. So we did both so we can start learning. But the takeaway from the global AI community last year was you certainly can't blame AI for making a bad decision. You can't take, in this case here, the technology out. So one of the organizations built, they call it the Stash framework, but just know that the answer to this question is where is this content coming from that grounded the knowledge base to begin with? Because if legal puts something in there that isn't right, then it should come back to them.
Sure.
So we should know who asked the question. We should know where the response came back. And possibly we also do the generative part where we generate content. Where did we generate it to? Was it a slide deck? Was it a video? We want to know, right? It's like a forensic audit, right? Of these conversations. We want to know all of that so we can come back and fix basically the knowledge base and ground it. So it's a cross-functional is the answer. I don't want to be like a politician here.
And we will
Cross-functional.
we'll come into that in a little bit. So
Yep.
in terms of, AI modeling that you alluded to, I'm looking at your 21-day process as a giant data vacuum. And again, I'm sorry, this is very interesting, but I'm sorry to give you just 30 seconds because you're spawning a million questions in my head and I've got to get in as many as
Right.
possible. So when it comes to AI modeling, they're only as good, as safe as the data they ingest. So what data governance mistakes do you often see as companies, let's say, are excited rather than rush into AI adoption?
They dump everything in. I heard somebody actually make the recommendation that if you got 510 files of SharePoint, 510,000 files of SharePoint, ingest it all, and then let AI figure out, your roadmap going forward. Bad decision. You really have to understand what's coming in and the ownership from each one of the departments. Now, where do you start in terms of the ownership in departments? It depends on the use cases. If the client, and by the way, I come in with use cases for every vertical, Philip, and they come back with 3 other ones I didn't think of. Even when I use
Absolutely.
AI, they all have their own use cases. So let's say your use case is Monday morning, you want to do a video, for your clients, it's wealth management. And you want that video to have the market data from the previous week and the previous week before, so you can get them the delta. So let's say that's your work at hand on Monday morning. You should have an agent that runs at 5 in the morning, the latest market data, compares this last week to the week before, gives you the highlights, generates the script. You could actually, with generative now, generate the video, but this company stopped short because they want a human to present the information. Then they want to be able to present the information and see the response. So that whole process was driven off of a market update call they do on Monday. That use case dictated what content that we ingest, not just internal, but we also go to external financial websites. Some have APIs, some don't have APIs. But even that, we ended up using a technology called Firecrawl. I mentioned then that actually interrogates certain sites, but it then expands and it finds more information and then
Say
brings
that
it
again,
together.
the name of the technology.
So it's Firecrawl. It's the only technology I've mentioned so far. And the reason being is the reason we got excited about it is we built the agent for research to begin with. Then we layered our agent with this technology, and it's a company that's taken off. So there are these discrete AI technologies that once you bundle them together, are amazing. But back to the central point, and that is once you know the use cases, you can back up and find out the content and the owners of the content, but don't pick any more than 3 or 4 use cases in your first 21 days.
I like that. Don't throw the kitchen sink at it.
No.
10 seconds. If you're briefing a board, and I promise to steal this answer because I'm going to be up against a board interview shortly. So if you're briefing a board today, how would you explain AI risk in plain business terms without making it too technical?
So we do have now a CEO roundtable for the global AI group, and it's only business owners. So the first thing that we had conversations about with this board group was, what is it about AI that's causing you to jump in? And it's 2026. If you're not doing this right now, if you don't have a knowledge base right now, it's not getting smarter. So put a stake in the ground right now, the CEO and others that are at the exec level, knowing that in 6 months, let's say in the next 6 months, you ingest what you do, your business. We had one client ingested 4,200 calls in 6 months. So what if you did 4,200 calls and then you were analyzing what good looked like on a sales call? And now why does the board care? Well, new logos, keep current logos. It is all about revenue and growth. But what if you could glean 4,200 calls? That company has maybe, I don't know, 5 managers that manage salespeople. How could you possibly do 4,200 ride-alongs? So I like that example because when I was asked that question from a CEO at this board meeting, I said, then what you do is you score what the good looks like. And then you compare your best versus your not so, right? Somebody who's on a plan. And then you give coaching. Well, how can you do that? Well, your training stuff is there with your sales stuff, is there with your financial stuff. In other words, are they advancing the deal? But if you could do those 3 things and turn around, right, your bottom 20%. So back to the CEOs, if you're not doing it, rest assured somebody else is. And this particular company, they didn't know coming into the project that was going to be possible. But the reason they did so well is they already had scoring of what good looked like, and they already had the enablement content. So they had the building blocks. Put this on top of a very good foundational AI model, and it'll start letting you know analysis wise after 100 calls. But imagine 4,200 calls. At the end of this year, maybe they're going to have, 3 times that. That's a lot of market data. If they don't get going, they won't have.
4,200 calls is impressive. So, we've talked about culture, we've talked about, AI culture, so to speak, collaboration, cross-functional collaboration. And as we get into, as you get into AI adoption in organizations, one thing's clear, right? It's just not only about the tools, it's about the culture. And so, it's important that there's cross-functional collaboration between security, legal, engineering, the whole business solution. You've got to, as we just talked about, there's issues on privacy, on trust, on IP. And you've got to make sure that, security is brought in a timely manner, so to speak. And, so there's a balance when it comes to a business leader. How do business leaders balance, personalization, automation, customer experience, ensure that the teams are collaborating? So I'm focusing more on the cultural side of AI
Yeah.
adoption, yet keeping the guardrails of governance and compliance. Talk about that experience, please.
One of the things that we did last year as part of our community is we had a workshop on, and this is all it was on, responsible AI. And so some people came in with the
I like
ideas.
that, responsible AI.
Yep, that's what we ended up calling it. And the professor that, had a lot of great answers to this, by the way, and he's like the sought after professor now in the Twin Cities because he jumped all in on this and said, look, we have got to adopt this. We can't not do this. Now think about a learning institution, right? Think about the LLM being Einstein. There's a lot of concerns and worry. So we did this event. We had 4 different groups of 10 people, but at the end, somebody got up and said, look, in our environment, we're allowing people to start and stop and not always be successful. So in other words, we're going to make some mistakes, but we're going to give you this sandbox, if you will. I'll use security more in sort of these promotional models. So give me a sandbox where I can do this work with AI, prove out what works and what doesn't for our company, but don't hold it against me. Now why? Because they want to accelerate what it is they're doing and know that the people that were in this group, and there were groups of 10, said right away, if only I had that, I'd be doing more with it. And what I find with these meetings is by the end of the 60 minutes, couple of sessions, let's say they go to, there's less fear of AI. Now the question is whether or not they're embracing it. And as one person put it, and I think this is a very fair statement, trust me, the CEOs are thinking about this. They may or may not be articulating to you that they're thinking about it. So you should be thinking about it. And if you're wondering what they're thinking, my advice would be ask them, where do we stand on AI? Where should we be in terms of our preparation? We know it's coming, but don't hide from it. It's that avoidance that causes the stalemate. And if it's a smaller business, and then obviously it's fun to work, that it's fun to work with small businesses.
No kidding, right? That's what wakes us up in the morning on the first day of the new year.
They can go from idea, even if it's in a boardroom, to execution later that week. And then we've worked with the bigger companies where from idea to you leave the boardroom saying it'll never happen. So if you go to the ones that it's going to happen, you go back to responsible point. The other thing they said was that these LLMs and our knowledge base can't be predisposed to the beliefs of, and I can't get political, but just know that they worry about that. Are these models slanted one way or another? Well, it should be slanted towards your company. I mean, you walk into these companies, Philip, and I know you've done this before, and you see the poster on the wall with the mission statement. And then you ask somebody in the meeting, "Hey, what's the mission statement?" They're like, "I don't know." So so I'm not picking on them. I'm just saying that how do you make that
It's true.
part of your culture and what you can do? Let's say that your memory, your cached knowledge-based memory knows your mission statement. As it's devising answers for virtually any audience, it's looking that up first. So what if that is become part of your culture through the knowledge base? You're just making it easier for them without having to, read the poster.
We're going to spend the next 4 or 5 minutes in some sort of a rapid fire. I still want to keep this meaningful because you do have a wealth of information. No conversation between us, Greg, would be complete without referring to our mutual friend, Mike Cross,
Ah,
all things Tesla and full self-driving. Right? So this morning, I've got full self-drive on. I'm on the way to the gym. There's literally, and I'm not making this up, an erratic driver up ahead. And so the car moves into a different lane, and what appears to me to be, a defensive move to avoid erratic behavior from the guy ahead. Uh, the guy behind me probably viewed that sudden lane change as more offensive, right? I thought this was a great example to lead into this question. As you see AI evolve in the next 3 to 5 years, um, you know, will it be more of a defensive asset or will it tilt the balance towards attackers?
well, you did mention that I've been at this for a while. So I'll go back to that point. I've never seen anything like this. The knowledge bases, some of the stuff that we came out of false starts in the late 90s had no real potential that this has. And it comes in a lightweight package as long as you have that foundational AI in place. So yeah, I don't think this is going to be defensive at all. I think if you
Yep.
flash forward 12 months, and I'll use another example, trucking company wanted to understand better the ultimate trucking route. It can do that. It can find out, the board meeting notes, and you want to compare the last 3 board meetings. It can do that in the next 5 minutes if you ingest the information. So if you want to get better at board meetings, better at trucking, this is an energy trucking company, better at whatever, it will do that. And so I haven't seen that before. And one CEO I'll mention, he goes, "This seems to me," it was about a construction loan. "This seems to be a $5 problem. Can we target $50 problems at least, Craig?"
Nope.
And I said, "You're right. You can automate literally anything with AI, but it's a $5 problem. So let's just
I
ignore it."
love it. I
Yep.
love it, right? There is your solution. You're taking your $100 problems and making them $5 problems, allowing you to now use that brain power more effectively and productively.
And
Well
and I
said.
and I have had, even interns in some of these meetings say, "All right, now what am I going to do?" Because it does do the low level redundant kind of work, and it does extremely well if it's grounded. And then it gets better over time. So look at it as, let's do the 100 level this year, the 200 level next year. Prompt of the day. I like my prompts that come through on email like every day, right? The best prompt ever. So, there's a million prompts. It's not the prompt, it's repeating the prompt and then learning from the repetitive. So you go from foundational to guided with use cases, and then you go to optimized. And you can only do that off of repeating certain aspects of your business. So I do think there's a tremendous upside. This is certainly not just defensive. I guess you could look at it as defensive, Philip, when I think about if somebody else is able to, get their revenue to employee to twice mine, I'm probably going to be worried about that. Well, even if my product is better, they're just more efficient. I'd be
Okay.
worried
More
about that.
power. Darwin's evolution theory, may the smartest guy with all the AI win. So, Craig Nelson, and I agree with you, right? Offensive is not a bad word. If you could give security leaders one hard truth about AI adoption, something they may not want to hear, what would it be?
I think the big deal is, do you roll your own that's already occurring, has already been occurring? How do you, roll that back in to the fold? So just know that you didn't delegate it, but it's happening. And how are you going to win them over? in some cases, win them back, right? Because if they're doing AI in the field off on their own, it's not benefiting others either. If you do it holistically across your organization, across all your folks, your learning is going to be accelerated. So just know if you don't think they're doing it, just know they are.
Yeah. And our wish for early adopters, may you be blessed with this wisdom in 2026. So, rapid fire, most dangerous phrase in AI adoption, we will secure it later. Agree or disagree?
Not good. So yeah, no.
One AI capability attackers are already abusing that defenders are underestimating.
One thing is these prompts can ingest, something, a document, accelerate, Excel spreadsheet, that could be hidden as it's on its way in.
That's a good one. The guys in the dark rooms are doing exactly the same thing you are, if not better, because they're learning from what you're doing. I like that. AI agents, productivity breakthrough or security nightmare?
Say that again.
AI agents,
Yep.
agentic AI.
Okay.
Leveraging this, is it a multiplier effect? Is it a productivity breakthrough? I'm more security focused here. So is it, leveraging productivity, or is it a security nightmare in your business, right? You've got to do, APIs and connect and get, are you herding cats when it comes to agentic AI?
So that data lake I mentioned earlier, great concept, but think about, the potential leak, as you're connecting, because now you are outside of the organization. And so that is a bit of a nightmare. But just know that as you're putting in place these technologies, I mentioned one earlier in the call, but we use multiple technologies, beginning with OpenAI. And then just know with each one of those, you do have to do a very detailed review of how they're securing that data, in transit, at rest, you name it. So now agentic AI is where it's going. And if you don't go there, I think you're going to have an issue come 2027 because these agents can act on their own. A prompt can act on itself, but when you chain them together and you have them run autonomous, off hours, preferred, yeah, very, very powerful.
Yeah, and organizations like yours do definitely provide the framework and the guidelines to help keep security, that's a passion for me, in front and center. Craig, this has really been a great conversation. We've crossed the 50 podcast mark. You've kept me on my toes on this one. Please come back at any time. Again, valuable. It'll take me a few minutes to digest what we just talked about. And you've provided us a wealth of information. We will provide in the show notes links to LinkedIn or any other resources that you provide us, so that our listeners can reach out to you should they want to, and I'm sure they will. Thank you for being here, Craig.
Yeah. And one last thing, this is my one major plug. So we have a lead agent called Navi. It's an AI navigator. So think of it as Siri or Alexa on steroids. So we built this AI agent, and I'd love to talk to anybody, whether it be security or business or CEOs, because we want to interact with people out there that are running a business, because we're building Navi to be basically that Uber agent that looks over a set of tools and content. So that's my major plug for Navi, the AI navigator.
Absolutely. I've seen it at work, and it's something to behold, and we'll definitely add links in our
Thank you.
post-production show.
Because it's only going to get better
Thank
through
you.
people. So
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, AI is moving faster than policy, faster than process, and in many cases, faster than our instincts. What today's conversation makes clear is AI strategy is, for me, security strategy as well. It's not governed. If it's not governed, it's not safe. If it's not understood, it's not trusted. And if it's deployed without guardrails such as the ones that Craig's company has designed, it doesn't matter how innovative it looks, it becomes a risk. The winners in this next chapter won't be the ones who move the fastest, they'll be the ones who move intentionally. Stay curious, stay disciplined, and above all, stay secure. Thank you. Until our next podcast.